What's so great about being American? Everything thinks being American is great. You got to understand, in the early 1800s, Americans lived with a massive cultural inferiority complex compared to the Europeans. Europeans had great artists, right? They had couple thousand years of history they can draw upon. They had great writers, great poets, great architecture, great buildings. Think about like 1820, 1830, 1840. I mean, Philadelphia is one of the biggest cities in America, and it's like barely a village. New York, Charleston, Boston, compared to Europeans, are barely villages. I mean, they didn't. I mean, you think of Europe, you think of like you've got the ruins of the Roman Empire, you've got Gothic cathedrals, you've got great massive buildings, palaces, and America's like, you're barely there. By analogy, I want to imagine that you've got some really rich, sophisticated, smarty, fancy pants people living in like Manhattan or Boston. I mean, not just people living there, but they're like the elite of the elite, the rich people that go to private schools, go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, go to the Met, go to the operas, concerts. And then you got, and I'm not being a snob here, I'm just trying to make a point. Then you got these cousins, these relations, these relatives that live in, say, Appalachia, like West Virginia, but not even the good part of West Virginia. They live in like a lean-to shack log cabin, and they get eighth grade education, barely have any dental work, poor hygiene, no manners, barely read books, right? Why don't you imagine these two cousins, right? Imagine and you can imagine the hillbilly Appalachian cousin, if she would ever visit New York City to visit her cousin, or her cousin ever visited her in Appalachia in her lean-to shack log cabin with no schools, no museum, no music, it's just awful culturally. I mean, there might be a real cultural inferiority complex. You can imagine that would happen, right? So I want you to imagine what's going on in America is like the Appalachian cousin, right? And Europe is the sophisticated person from New York or Boston or DC, that kind of thing. Americans are thinking to themselves, we don't have any great buildings. We've never produced any great artists. So we're trying, a few here and there. I mean, by 1830, I mean, your history is less than 100 years old, really. I mean, the revolution happened in 1776. I mean, Americans have been there for maybe 100 years or so before then. But again, most Americans at that point were like barely scraping by. Most Americans are agrarians or living in the mud. It's embarrassing for a lot of Americans, right? And so Americans just feel like the greatest goal of an American is to be European if you're rich. No one's really proud of. They feel embarrassed. Cotton Mather is someone I study. He's like one of the last Puritans, and he was so proud of the fact that he was trying to do science and he got accepted. Some of his papers accepted to the Royal Academy of Sciences in London. That was his big thing. It's like you could be the smartest, most sophisticated guy culturally in America, and you'd be like a nothing in Europe. So you're just crawling, trying to get the Europeans to love you and respect you and like you, and it's kind of a losing proposition. So Americans feel bad. Like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton are basically bad versions of Oxford and Cambridge. They kind of know it. They don't want to admit it too much that they know it. Again, they're not producing anything great. Emerson actually wants to argue in The American Scholar that, no, actually, it's fantastic to be an American. The Americans were just so much better than Europeans. And it's like a jujitsu move. You want to say the very strength of America is what you think was a weakness. And the very strength of Europe is actually their crippling weakness. Meaning this. I want you to imagine that you're a young student, a young burgeoning intellect, a young artist. And your entire education has been the Western canon that I spoke of before, right? I mean, all the stuff's just piling down on you on your shoulders. Imagine you've got a backpack, and your whole education is just one more book, one more painting, one more book, one more art work, one more philosophy. And your entire education, you're just weighed down. It's just dragging you down, and your your knees are buckling, right? And at some point, it's your turn to try to produce some kind of great poetic work, some kind of epic literature, some kind of history. Make some kind of painting, do some. It's your turn now after this education you've been given, this massive kind of privileged education. And though Emerson would say something like, well, it's possible you might produce something great. It's possible, but actually the odds are against you. Your entire education is like working against or cripple your ability to produce great art. Let me back up a little bit. What is great art, right? Great art is, in Emerson's mind, like touching the divine. Speaking of producing, it's like there's this whole invisible I think you think platonically, right? There's this whole world of truth out there in the transcendent realm. Again, transcendentalism, the transcendent beyond this world. And if you're an artist, if you have this beautiful soul, this severe kind of intense sensitivity, think Werther, all right? You can go into the woods, smell the mulch, feel the trees, hear the rustling of the woods. And it's like you're able to like pierce a pinhole from this immanent world into the transcendent world. And you can see through that pinhole and maybe pop your head through and see this invisible world of magnificence, of truth, of God's truth. And the poet is a prophet. The artist is a seer. And then you drag whatever truth you can from that transcendent, beautiful world, pull it into this world and make a physical manifestation by art or sculpture or a poetic beauty. All right. And that's what real art is, to see the truth. There's a world of man and the world of the invisible world of the God or gods or divine things up here, but we live in a muck of man. And what you want to do is you want to crawl out of the muck of man to see the world and grab something heavenly and bring it down here. That is truth. Okay. And you're going to get that by, in some sense, purifying yourself. You want to actually run away from this world, hide in the woods, and really commune with God without corruption, without static. You want to get this clearest reception and then make an image of it, make a beauty of it. And in many ways, the history of the world has been these sensitive souls who can find bits of this stuff and bring it down. The problem, though, is culture has massively been misunderstood what beauty is, what truth is. Instead of like finding truth, they find that manifestation of truth in some old artist, and they don't get to the truth behind that. It's like the prophet is pointing to God. Instead, all you do is you point to the finger, not the thing the finger is pointing to. And that's been a massive miseducation in the Western world. And if you're in Europe, all you see is the archaeology, the dead things that were once great in their time, and we've slavishly are worshiping, these dead things as a thing itself. When in fact, the best they are exemplars of other people in the past who made some attempt to point to God. And so Europeans, it's like, so imagine that kid, that young person that's been educated and their backpack is now like 900 pounds of all the stuff that's stacked on. And if their minds are just so corrupted or shaped and formed by the legacy of the past, when it comes to their attempt to make something beautiful, true, and original, it's like they can't. All they can do is imitate. It's like if all my life I've read nothing but Shakespeare, then I don't think it's my turn. You go write something. All I can do is like do my hackneyed version of Shakespeare. But what makes Shakespeare beautiful, perhaps, is he points to something great, but all I can do is point to Shakespeare, not the thing that Shakespeare is pointing to. So he's saying Europeans it's not just what your education has given you. It's like you live in a world of oldness. Never around you, some ancient ruin, and this stuff just shackles your mind. It keeps you from breaking free. What Emerson says, actually, this is really like a weird jujitsu move. Americans are better off because we live in this virgin. No, it's not really from his point of view. We live in a virgin land that's yet been plowed. Fields have been unplowed. Art has not been written. There's a lot of nature and not a lot of civilization. And remember before about the Romantics, like civilization is corrupting. The past is corrupting. So what you want to do is you actually want to take all this great originality and all this nature and just go buck wild, find your truth. Because the truth lies within yourself, not out there, but within here. And it's your ability to commune with God directly to find it. Emerson does not like the past. Transcendentalists don't like the past. They don't like oppression. They don't like anyone telling what to do. There are these choice little words, the phrases that Emerson's very good at. He's very good at these. One of my favorite is, a foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds. I want to repeat that. A foolish consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds. I'm never ever sure you've heard that before, but I love that phrase. I mean, I think there's some truth to that. The idea is that sometimes we're taught in our education, just obey, just repeat it again and again and again. We just do dumb things over and over again. And I think that will corrupt your mind just to do things. He's the kind of guy that wants to say, why? Why do we do that? Why do we do that? Why must we do that? Over and over again. He has another phrase, to be great is to be misunderstood. Meaning, if you like say, give some speech, some philosophy, some claim, and all the old men, all the scholars say, "Yes, good job." I think he's saying that's a good sign you're wrong, because you're simply photocopying or writing another version of that which came before. You're just writing another rerun of a TV show, right? Think of an old TV show like Law and Order, and you're a brand new writer, and you're gonna write another version of Law and Order, and it's like 89%, 99% repetitive what's already been happening, and it works because it's repetitive. But he wants originality, earth-shattering truth that breaks. Like, the more you're shattering all expectations of anything that came before, the more likely you're right. See, that's his version of what truth is: to break things, to shatter things, always be original, always be pushing the boundaries. And he has an allergic reaction. There's this from the past, from authority, from community. I want you to think about what education might look like in the mind of Emerson and his ilk, other transcendentalists. Education used to look something. Traditionally, this is what education was. Actually, at Harvard, Yale, and Princeton at this time. It's called a recitation, for example. This is how you do a Latin class. There will be they got straight. Everyone's in rows like a church pew. Line, and a big stage and a lectern and the professor at the front. They didn't have classes that we have the way we have classes. I mean, a lot of the classes were like classical languages or mathematics. But let's just take a Latin class, right? You would actually read a passage from, say, Cicero. And so you just count off. First guy, upper left, in the front row. You would read a passage from Cicero. The next person would have to, in a sense, break down the grammar of Cicero. And the third person would then translate the Cicero in English. Great, got one sentence down. Fourth person, read the next line from Cicero. Next person, break down the grammar, the declensions, all the parts of speech. The third person would just read it. All right, and just do that. You just did that for like 90 minutes, and that was class. That's what you did for 4 years. No one ever questioned, why are we reading Cicero anyway? Is this worth reading about? What's the point of all this? No, their assumption was like, there's been a deposit of truth that's been given to you by your fathers and your grandfathers or great-grandfathers, and you should just say, thank you, may I have another. Be grateful for what's been given to you. I like tradition, and I see the point of this, but there's no, it's like a catechism. Church, right? This is God's revelation in the Old New Testament. This is the theology of John Calvin. This is the Westminster Catechism, or choose your, or something from the Catholic Church, and you just absorb it. You don't question it. You just absorb it. You might say, how great is this? Let's talk about that, but you don't challenge it. That was the education that Emerson's dealing with right now. So what might be the ideal kind of education, that the transcendentalists want? Well, there actually was a transcendentalist woman in this circle of transcendentalists named Margaret Fuller, and her big contribution was she created a school in Concord, Massachusetts. And, when I first read about her style of pedagogy, well, let me tell you about it, right? So rather than having rows, right, in which there was like an instructor disseminating truth, and you had to like read these old books, and understand it, they would sit in a circle, kind of like, have you guys sitting in a circle, right? And they would read books together. And it wasn't, again, it's a circle, not a lecture, but imagine, by the way, the lecture hall comes from 19th century Germany, so that's different, but it's not like the professor would say, I will tell you what books to read because they are great, because all our ancestors said they're great. And the professor wouldn't say something like, now that you read it, this is what it means. Memorize it. You'll be testing on it in a week, and you better be exact. That's what we tend to think of a certain kind of education that maybe is frowned upon, but that's very old school education. Margaret Fuller said, I'm going to make them read books. I will invite them to read books, which are good, and these books will be kind of what I said in the previous lecture in Emerson 1, like they're like the fertilizer of the mind. The purpose of reading these books, the value of the book is not that the books are inherently excellent, right? But the excellence of the book is what it can do for you. And so in many ways, what she was thinking of, the image she had is like a gardener. I'm merely planting seeds with these books, with these ideas in the minds of these young students. And I want these ideas to like grow organically. I'm not going to make it grow. I can't, but I organically grow the ideas of their minds. And again, the gardening metaphor would be like, I want to fertilize it. I want to care for their minds. I want to water it. I want to give it sunshine. And if the seeds grow, they grow. That's great. And to make the metaphor even worse, though, it's not like I'm planting a corn seed and you will get a corn stalk. It's like you will turn. It's more like this. Like I want you to become what you were always meant to be, and I don't know what you're supposed to be. So I want you to be the best you're going to be, and all I can do is like you're going to be what you're going to be, and all I can do is help you become what you're supposed to be. It's a more like, again, the metaphors get kind of weird, but like, so I want to imagine like you are an acorn, you are a maple twirly bird, you're a corn kernel, you're a mustard seed. And it's almost like the gardener. I'm planting these seeds in you, or rather, the seed is in you. The books I'm offering you to read are merely the fertilizer, the sunshine, the nutrients, and the water that I'm sort of feeding you the seeds. And I'm like, I don't know what you're going to turn into. And I don't want to interfere with what you're going to turn into. I don't want to retard it or pervert it or change it. All I can do is just help it flourish. Now, what Emerson and what Margaret Fuller would say is that the kind of education we have right now is like, it's suffocating, It's like it's stomping it out. And you might actually become what you're supposed to be, but almost in spite of your education, not because of it. And in some ways, you have to overcome culture and education. You have to fight against culture and education to be what you're supposed to be. And some people, like Emerson, who are strong enough, can fight against it and become it in rebellion against their education and culture. But what they say is we need to redo education so you become, to help people flourish, to become what they're meant to be, I like to think about that. I mean, and I want you to ask yourself, how do you feel about that? How do you feel? That's an odd question. I mean, what education do you prefer? In some ways, I mean, I think in the honors college type setting, you're supposed to look at the transcendentals like, oh, bad, they're terrible, anti-traditional. Fine, maybe that's the case. At the same time, though, I mean, our own honors college education is a weird hybrid between this veneration for the great books of tradition, and yet the way we teach is a certain kind of, we sort of circle and we ask, well, what do you think about it, right? I'm asking you questions. I mean, I'm not supposed to like tell you what to think. Maybe I do, but I try not to. But we think the ideal education is one in which you come to conclusions on your own. That's very Margaret Fuller, by the way. That's very Emersonian. But you can see how Emerson and the Transcendentalists, what they hate mostly are authority. They hate tradition. They hate orthodoxy. They hate dogma. They want freedom. They want intellectual freedom. And in many ways, you can think of Emerson as being is in conversation with people like Werther. Again, the synergy between Emerson and Werther is really strong. That'd be a great paper or an interesting paper at least something for our discussion. I want you to think of someone like Emerson in conversation with someone like Frederick Douglass. Again, very, very different beings. Clearly very, very different. And yet, can't you see how Douglass is this person who is in some ways becoming himself, in spite of the restrictions of the world around him. And Douglass questions authority, questions dogma, questions truth, or what's been given to him as truth. Think about what Douglass is fighting. I mean, he's coming from a whole educational system that's telling him, you're a slave, you don't deserve to have freedom. And Douglass is, in a sense, reading these books, right? These old classic books about freedom and political freedom, right? And human dignity. And these books, he's not following these books like dogma, like authority, but rather these books are simply stimuli to help him come up with his own ideas. And then he flourishes and becomes a being that no one's ever seen before. No one's ever seen something like Frederick Douglass, right? He breaks the mold. I mean, these are odd bedfellows, but I think there's a real similarity between Emerson and Margaret Fuller and Frederick Douglass. Here's a word that I want to throw out at you that I value a great deal, but and the Transcendentalists value a great deal. But people before them didn't really care about this. Originality and creativity. Now think about that, right? I mean, I really value originality and creativity. And so do the Transcendentalists. I mean, they say there's something special in you, right? And you come up with your own ideas that no one's ever seen before. And the value of your idea is not how much it conforms with everyone else, but how much it breaks the mold. If you're not a Transcendentalist, if you're people before the Transcendentalists, you're the Trinitarian Orthodox or you're the Congregationalists, they would say a great education is someone who was produced by, and we got exactly what we expected. And a great artist, a great poet, a great thinker, a great part of our community, someone who says exactly what you're supposed to say, just a variation on what we already expect. Don't break the mold. Don't defy expectations. Just do what you're supposed to do. The transcendentalists love originality, or I hate this word, but I keep using it over and over again in the terms of these people. Be authentic. Be true to yourself. Don't. It's like, what's a great artist? What's a great thinker? I mean, imagine, you guys know what paint by numbers are? I mean, what if you're just really, really good at coloring in the lines and following directions, and you made another version of the Mona Lisa? Would that be great, even if it's technically perfect? Right? The transcendental will say, that is garbage. It's crap. You just imitated something that was great from the past. But the greatness is measured by how much it resonates with the truth in you. And the truth in you is like a direct line to God in the transcendent realm, you know? And they would say that it's original. You're not great by following the rules. You're great by breaking all the rules. Freedom, America. Do you see how this is a very American idea, you know? It's actually a very modern idea in all the ways we discussed what modern means, as opposed to pre-modern, as opposed to the tradition in which people are shackled. I think these ideas are interesting. They're fascinating. They're a little bit dangerous. I want you to think about, as a Christian of a certain sort, how are you supposed to respond to this? This is a safe way for Christians to be, all right? So I want you to think about that. Is an appropriate way for Christians to be. Okay, great.